stories have a way of meeting us where we are, sometimes through the worlds we already know, sometimes through imagination, and sometimes through the truths that hide behind the page. Tonight, you'll hear all three. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where are you listening from? I once saw a comment from someone in Australia, and it made me smile. I love seeing those little notes. It feels like this story is traveling the world with us. The first arc is drawn directly from lore, the magical creatures of the wizarding world, from thestrals and hippogriffs to boggarts and phoenixes. Each creature has meaning, each one a reflection of fear, humility, and mystery. This part is true to the series itself, a soft exploration of what these beasts reveal. The second arc is something more imaginative, an original tale, a kind of gentle fan fiction. You'll meet Selene, a witch whose quiet choices at Durmstrang carried weight far beyond what history remembers. Her path asks us to think about restraint and about the power of what we choose not to claim. And finally, the last arc turns outward, toward facts, secrets, and the myths that shaped the series itself. From folklore tied to the Forbidden Forest, to languages and symbols that echo through our own history, this part weaves fiction and reality together. So, as you listen, you'll drift between what is canon, what is imagined, and what is true. Together, they form one journey. And before the end, a single question will remain, quietly waiting for you in the dark. Ever wondered what truly lurks beyond the Forbidden Forest? Or what a boggart really looks like when it isn't just a fear in your mind? Dive deep into the captivating lore of the wizarding world as we uncover the most enchanting, terrifying, and utterly bizarre magical creatures. You think you know them all, but prepare to be surprised by some of the most fascinating beings Harry, Hermione, and Ron ever encountered. The Forbidden Forest itself is a living archive of magical life. Home to centaurs with eyes turned toward the heavens, it is also host to creatures far less noble. Acromantulas, vast spiders capable of human speech, spin their webs in its darkest corners. Ragog and his brood among the most infamous, few dare to tread so deep, for even Hagrid's friendship could not tame their hunger. And then there are the Thestral's skeleton-winged horses, invisible to all but those who have seen death. When Harry finally glimpsed them in his 5th year, he learned what few students understood, that these eerie, gentle beasts are not omens of doom but guides, loyal and patient, waiting to carry riders into the unknown. Beyond the forest lies the water. In the depths of the Black Lake, live merpeople, a proud and ancient society. Their grey skin and wild green hair are far from the romanticized tales of sirens. Instead, their songs, haunting and beautiful, reveal a culture as complex as any wizarding family. Harry met them during the Triwizard Tournament, discovering that beneath their stern exterior was a fierce sense of honor. But the wizarding world is not all shadow and mystery. Mischievous nifflers scurry after shiny treasures, often leaving chaos in their wake. Botrackles, tiny guardians of wandwood trees, cling to bark with twig-like limbs, loyal to their trees above all else. Even the great phoenix, like Dumbledore's forks, rises from flame and ash, embodying the resilience of magic itself. Of course, not every creature is seen in its natural state. Take the boggart, for instance, shapeshifter, whose true form is unknown, forever hidden beneath the fears it reflects. When Lupin taught his students the ridiculous charm, he revealed that a boggart's power fades the moment fear is met with laughter. A lesson not just in defense, but in courage. And looming above all, the dragon symbols of both power and peril. From the Hungarian horntail Harry faced in the Triwizard Tournament to the Ukrainian ironbelly guarding Gringotts, Dragons embody the untamable force of nature. Wizards may study them, even challenge them, but never truly control them. Together, these creatures form the living fabric of the wizarding world. They are not merely background to wizarding life, but active participants, sometimes companions, sometimes threats, always reminders that magic exists beyond human hands. So the question remains, when you next step into this world, will you walk toward the comforting hoot of an owl, or into the shadows where thestrals wait? When we step into the wizarding world, it is easy to be drawn first to its wonders. The enchanted ceiling of the great hall, the phoenix rising in flame, or the soft rustle of owls carrying letters. Yet woven into this world are creatures that embody its darker edges. They remind us that magic is not always gentle. It can wound, it can terrify, and it can challenge even the bravest witches and wizards. These creatures, though often feared, reveal more about wizarding culture than we might expect. Let us begin with the Forbidden Forest and the acromantulas that dwell within it. Aragog, raised by Hagrid, grew into the patriarch of a colony of giant, intelligent spiders. They could speak, reason, and even recognize loyalty, but make no mistake, humans were still prey. Hagrid loved Aragog, but his bond with the spider exposed a dangerous truth. Affection alone cannot erase nature's hunger. What does it tell us that Hagrid saw companionship, while the rest of the school saw only a lethal threat? Perhaps that wizards, too, reveal their character in how they approach the Then we turn to the Boggart, a shapeshifter whose true form no wizard has ever seen. When Lupin introduced them to his third-year students, the lesson was not really about defense against a creature at all. It was about fear. A Boggart draws its power from the imagination, forcing wizards to confront the thing they dread most. The ridiculous charm works because laughter disarms fear, turning a source of paralysis into something harmless. Here, the beast becomes a teacher. It shows that danger is not always in the fangs or claws, but in the shadows of the mind. I wonder if, faced with a Boggart, would you know what shape it might take before you? And then, darker still, the Dementors, classified by the Ministry as beings rather than beasts, they nonetheless function as predators. Feeding on human happiness, they leave despair in their wake, and can, with the Dementor's kiss, consume a soul entirely. When stationed at Hogwarts during Harry's third year, they revealed not only the terror of their presence, but the moral failings of wizard institutions. The Ministry employed them as guards of Azkaban, trusting creatures of despair to uphold justice. What does that choice say about the wizarding government? About its willingness to trade mercy for control? Across these examples, a pattern emerges. Dark and dangerous beasts in the wizarding world are not only external threats, they are reflections. Acromantulas remind us of the limits of taming nature. Boggarts teach that our deepest dangers are internal. Dementors expose how icily fear and authority intertwine. Together, they reveal that the wizarding world is not safeguarded by spells alone, but by the courage, choices, and resilience of those who live within it. Not every creature in the wizarding world exists to terrify. Some walk beside wizards as partners, teachers, or even quiet friends. These companions remind us that magic is not only a force to be feared, but also a bond that can be nurtured through respect and care. Consider the hippogriff. Proud, noble, and easily offended, it demands courtesy before anything else. When Hagrid introduced Buckbeak to the third years, the lesson was not about riding a creature into the skies. It was about humility. Harry's bow to Buckbeak and Buckbeak's bow in return showed that trust is a two-way exchange. Yet this same creature became the center of conflict when Draco Malfoy mocked tradition and was injured. The trial that followed revealed something larger than one boy's arrogance. It showed how easily wizarding law can reduce a living being to property, even when that being has demonstrated intelligence and honor. Owls, by contrast, seem simple. Yet, in the daily life of Hogwarts and beyond, they are essential. They carry letters, packages, and news, bridging distances across the magical community. Hedwig was not only Harry's pet, but also his first true connection to the wizarding world. When she died protecting him, it symbolized the loss of innocence and the weight of war. How often do we overlook creatures that make life possible simply because they work so quietly? The line between companion and servant becomes more complicated when we look at house elves. They are not classified as beasts, but their presence forces us to ask difficult questions. Wizards relied on their labor for centuries, often without acknowledgement. Dobby's story reminds us that freedom is not a gift, but a right. His loyalty to Harry was not born of ownership, but of choice. What does it mean that a house elf needed a sock to become free, while other creatures roam the forest as equals? Through these examples, we see that magical companions are not merely side characters. Hippogriffs teach respect, owls embody constancy, and house elves reveal the biases hidden within wizarding lore. Together, they show that companionship in the wizarding world is shaped not by domination, but by recognition. So, as you reflect, ask yourself this: if you lived at Hogwarts, would you bow before the hippogriff with humility, care for your owl with gratitude, and see the house elf not as a servant but as a person? The answer might tell us as much about ourselves as it does about the creatures. When we began with the darker side of magical creatures, we walked through shadows. We met acromantulas that could not be tamed, boggarts that lived in fear itself, and dementors that thrived on despair. These beings reminded us that magic is not always safe. It can expose weakness, it can challenge courage, and it can reveal the failures of even the greatest institutions. Yet the wizarding world is never only darkness. It is also a place of light, loyalty, and trust. For every creature that feeds on fear, there is another that nurtures bonds between wizard and beast. Companions like hippogriffs, owls, and even house elves show that magic is not solely about mastery. It is also about humility, gratitude, and the recognition of life beyond one's own. So, as we leave the forest of shadows behind, let us step into a gentler light. What happens when wizards stop trying to control and instead learn to respect? What lessons emerge when magical creatures are not threats but friends? When we began with the darker side of magical creatures, we walked through shadows. We met acromantulas that could not be tamed, boggarts that lived in fear itself, and dementors that thrived on despair. These beings reminded us that magic is not always safe. It can expose weakness, it can challenge courage, and it can reveal the failures of even the greatest institutions. Yet, the wizarding world is never only darkness. It is also a place of light, loyalty, and trust. For every creature that feeds on fear, there is another that nurtures bonds between wizard and beast. Companions like hippogriffs, owls, and even house elves show that magic is not solely about mastery. It is also about humility, gratitude, and the recognition of life beyond one's own. Consider the hippogriff. Proud, noble, and easily offended, it demands courtesy before anything else. When Hagrid introduced Buckbeak to the third years, the lesson was not about riding a creature into the skies, it was about humility. Harry's bow to Buckbeak, and Buckbeak's bow in return, showed that trust is a two-way exchange. Yet this same creature became the center of conflict when Draco Malfoy mocked tradition and was injured. The trial that followed revealed something larger than one boy's arrogance. It showed how easily wizarding law can reduce a living being to property, even when that being has demonstrated intelligence and honor. Owls, by contrast, seem simple. Yet, in the daily life of Hogwarts and beyond, they are essential. They carry letters, packages, and news, bridging distances across the magical community. Hedwig was not only Harry's pet, but also his first true connection to the wizarding world. When she died protecting him, it symbolized the loss of innocence and the weight of war. How often do we overlook creatures that make life possible simply because they work so quietly? The line between companion and servant becomes more complicated when we look at house elves. They are not classified as beasts, but their presence forces us to ask difficult questions. Wizards relied on their labor for centuries, often without acknowledgement. Dobby's story reminds us that freedom is not a gift but a right. His loyalty to Harry was not born of ownership but of choice. What does it mean that a house elf needed a sock to become free, while other creatures roam the forest as equals? Through these examples, we see that magical companions are not merely side characters. Hippogriffs teach respect, owls embody constancy, and house elves reveal the biases hidden within wizarding lore. Together, they show that companionship in the wizarding world is shaped not by domination, but by recognition. So as you reflect, ask yourself this: if you lived at Hogwarts, would you bow before the hippogriff with humility, care for your owl with gratitude, and see the house elf not as a servant, but as a person? The answer might tell us as much about ourselves as it does about the creatures. When we speak of magical companions, it is tempting to think of them as unique to wizards alone. Hippogriffs that demand respect, owls that deliver letters across continents, house elves that reveal uncomfortable truths about servitude and freedom. Yet, if we pause for a moment, we can see that these lessons are not limited to the magical. In the Muggle world, people form bonds with animals that teach similar virtues. A dog's loyalty, a horse's strength, even the quiet companionship of a cat offer reminders of trust and interdependence. Just as a wizard must bow to a hippogriff with humility, so too must a rider earn the trust of a horse. Just as owls carry letters faithfully, so to do countless messengers and technologies link Muggles together, though often taken for granted. And just as house elves raise questions about freedom and dignity, so too does the Muggle world wrestle with issues of labor, fairness, and respect for those whose work is often invisible. This comparison reminds us that the wizarding world is not so far removed from our own. Its creatures may be draped in feathers of fire or wings of bone, but the values they teach, humility, loyalty, gratitude, speak across both worlds. And so, having explored companionship, we now turn to something even deeper. What about creatures that are not merely helpers, but symbols? Creatures whose very existence carries meaning about life, death, purity, and renewal. In the wizarding world, these are beings that bridge the ordinary and the extraordinary. They are not just companions or threats. They are living metaphors. Let us now step into that realm of wonder and renewal, where thestrals, phoenixes, and unicorns remind us that some creatures are not only part of life, but part of the mysteries that surround it. Stories often carry truths more powerfully than lessons written in a book. So let us begin with one from the very heart of Hogwarts. It was the 5th year when Harry Potter first saw them. The carriages that carried students up to the castle had always seemed to move by themselves, wheels crunching over gravel with no driver in sight. But that September, after the death of Cedric Diggory, Harry noticed something different. Standing at the front of the carriage was a creature unlike anything he had seen before. A skeletal horse with leathery wings, its head gaunt, its eyes pale and unblinking. It was a Most students could not see them at all. Only those who had truly witnessed death could. To others, the carriages remained enchanted, invisible creatures pulling invisible loads. But to Harry, to Luna Lovegood, and to a few others, the Thestrals were real, breathing, undeniable. And here lies the lesson. The creatures were not symbols of death to be feared. They were gentle, even noble, misunderstood, simply because their truth was hidden from most eyes. They showed that grief changes perception, and that with loss comes a deeper kind of understanding. From this story we learn that magical creatures can be more than companions or dangers. They can be teachers of philosophy. Thestrals remind us that what is invisible to some may still be real. They remind us that sorrow is not only an end, but also a doorway into a new way of seeing. Now turn from the forest to the high tower of Dumbledore's office, where another creature once taught its own lesson. Fawkes, the headmaster's phoenix, was more than a pet. He was renewal incarnate. In the Chamber of Secrets, Fawkes came to Harry's aid, blinding the basilisk and healing Harry's mortal wound with his tears. Later, when Dumbledore faced trials of his own, Fawkes would appear again, loyal beyond measure. Yet the phoenix does not remain forever. It burns into ash, only to rise again. Its very life cycle is a parable of resilience. From fire comes rebirth. From endings come beginnings. For wizards and for us alike, the phoenix teaches that despair is never final. And then, deeper into the forbidden forest, we find the unicorn. Silver blood glistening in moonlight, a creature so pure that to harm it is an act of violation. When Voldemort, weak and broken, drank unicorn blood to preserve his life, he marked himself with a curse worse than death. To take such a life for selfish gain was to shatter the natural order. Unicorns embody innocence, a reminder that there are things in this world which must be respected for their own sake. What unites these creatures is not their power, but their meaning. The Thestral is a lesson in grief and perspective. The Phoenix is a lesson in resilience and hope. The Unicorn is a lesson in purity and restraint. None of them are merely beasts to be tamed. They are living symbols, woven into the very fabric of wizarding belief. And so we must ask, quietly to ourselves, if we lived in the wizarding world, which of these creatures would speak to us most? Would it be the Thestral, guiding us through grief into understanding? Would it be the Phoenix, reminding us to rise from our failures? Or would it be the Unicorn, calling us to honor innocence in a world so quick to exploit it? In these creatures of wonder and renewal, we find more than magic. We find truths about life, loss, and hope that transcend the wizarding world itself. There is a story told in hushed tones at Hogwarts, one that begins in the forest. Not the well-worn tale of Harry and the Thestrals, nor even Voldemort's violation of the unicorn, but a quieter moment passed down among the professors. Long ago, before Dumbledore's time as headmaster, a young Ravenclaw student wandered too far into the forbidden forest one night. He had heard whispers that unicorns were drawn to innocence, and in the pride of youth he wished to test the truth. Lantern in hand, he walked into the trees until the castle lights were only a memory behind him. Hours passed, and the forest seemed endless. Shadows crept along the ground, and eyes glimmered from every branch above. The boy grew afraid. Just when he thought he had lost his way completely, the undergrowth parted and a clearing appeared. In the center stood a unicorn, its coat so white it seemed to glow against the darkness. The boy dropped his lantern and froze. The creature lowered its head, not in threat, but in acknowledgement. For a moment, boy and beast stood in silence, but temptation came quickly. He reached into his robes, not to harm, but to touch. to prove to his classmates that he had seen the impossible. The unicorn stepped back, gaze steady, and in that instant the boy felt the weight of his arrogance. He lowered his hand, bowed his head, and watched as the unicorn disappeared into the trees. When he returned to the castle at dawn, he said nothing. But those who knew him later claimed that from that night on, his ambition softened, his pride tempered. He grew into a man of quiet wisdom, never again speaking of the forest, but always carrying himself as though he had glimpsed something sacred. Why tell this story? Because it reminds us that magical creatures are not only beings of flesh and bone. They are woven into lessons that mark those who encounter them. The Ravenclaw boy's tale is not recorded in textbooks. Yet it echoes the same truth Harry learned in his second year, that unicorns are not trophies, but guardians of purity. And this is where the wizarding world meets the Muggle one. For Muggles to have told stories of creatures that reveal lessons rather than just power. Think of the phoenix in ancient Greek legend, rising from its ashes to symbolize immortality. Or the winged horse Pegasus, born from the blood of Medusa, representing both freedom and the weight of divine purpose. Even the unicorn appears in Muggle lore, often painted in medieval bestiaries as a symbol of innocence and grace, pursued by hunters who could never truly tame it. These myths, separated from wizarding fact, nonetheless speak of the same truths: rebirth, humility, purity. It is tempting to see magical creatures as fantastical, belonging to a world beyond our own. Yet the myths of Muggles suggest something else. They suggest that across cultures and centuries, humans have always reached for creatures to embody ideas that words alone could not capture. Wizards see the phoenix burst into flame and learn that despair is not final. Muggles hear of a phoenix in story and draw the same lesson. Wizards bow before a hippogriff to earn respect. Muggles tell of Pegasus and imagine the humility of flight beyond human reach. This parallel reveals something profound. Magic may be hidden from the Muggle world, yet the human need for meaning bridges both. Creatures in the wizarding world live and breathe, while creatures in the Muggle world live in story. But both carry the same weight. Both teach that the mysteries of life, death, purity, and renewal are not bound by walls or ministries. They belong to the human imagination itself. So, as we move forward, let us carry this thought. The creatures of wonder and renewal are not only about what wizards see, but about what all humans long to understand. Whether in forest or fable, they whisper the same truths. And now we turn to those beings that are not only symbols but legends. Dragons that breathe fire across centuries, merpeople who sing their culture from the depths of lakes, guardians and rulers of myth, creatures that stand not just at the edges of wizarding society, but at the very heart of its imagination. There are moments in the history of Hogwarts that seem to ripple outward, not just as events, but as legends in their own right. One such moment came during the Triwizard Tournament, when Harry Potter faced the Hungarian Horn. Picture the scene. The arena was filled with students, professors, and foreign visitors. The task was simple in design, yet deadly in practice. Each champion had to retrieve a golden egg guarded by a dragon. The egg was not only a clue for the second task, but also a test of courage, ingenuity, and survival. When Harry drew his lot, he found himself pitted against the Horntail, one of the most dangerous dragon breeds known. Its black scales gleamed like armor, its eyes burned with predatory focus, and its spiked tail could crush a man in a single blow. Harry's strategy was not brute force, but creativity. Summoning his broom with the Echo Charm, he took to the skies. The Horntail roared, spreading its wings as fire burst from its throat, scorching the stone around him. What followed was not simply a battle, but a dance of survival. Harry darted, dodged, and dove, each move fueled by both terror and determination. At last, with one daring sweep, he snatched the egg and escaped the beast's claws. The crowd erupted, but the lesson remained. Facing a dragon is not about conquering it. It is about acknowledging the enormity of what stands before you and finding the courage to move within its shadow. This encounter captures what dragons symbolize in the wizarding world. They are not pets, they are not companions. They are guardians of raw, untamable magic. Wizards may breed them, study them, even steal from them. But dragons always remind us that some forces remain beyond control. Their fire is a warning as much as it is a spectacle. Now, turn from the skies to the waters of the Black Lake. During the second task of the same tournament, Harry descended into the depths and discovered a world few wizards had ever seen. There he met the merpeople, beings often misunderstood through myths of song and beauty. In truth, their grey skin, sharp features, and wild green hair revealed a society alien, yet deeply proud. They lived by their own rules and their own sense of honor. They guarded the hostages not out of malice, but out of duty, keeping to the terms of the tournament with unwavering resolve. Merpeople remind us that guardianship does not always take the form of fire and fury. Sometimes it is expressed through law, culture, and the defense of one's own. Wizards who dismiss them as primitive fail to see that their civilization is as structured and ancient as any above ground. What does it say about wizardkind that so many treat merpeople as curiosities rather than equals? Even smaller beings, like Grindylows, reveal the lesson of guardianship. In the same lake, these pale green water demons lurked with long fingers and sharp teeth, pulling at Harry as he swam. They were not mighty like dragons, nor organized like merpeople, yet they served as a reminder that danger often hides in overlooked places. Guardianship, in their case, was instinctive and territorial, a defense of their waters rather than a grand cultural stand. Together, dragons, merpeople, and Grindylows form a spectrum of guardianship in the wizarding world. Some guard treasures, some guard traditions, and some guard territory, yet all remind wizards of a single truth. Not everything in the magical world bends to human will. Some creatures stand as limits, as symbols of what lies beyond mastery. So let us ask ourselves, when faced with a guardian, do we attempt to dominate, or do we learn to respect what cannot be controlled? For in that choice lies the difference between arrogance and wisdom. There is a story that wanders quietly through the halls of wizarding history. It is not as well known as the Tri-Wizard Tournament, nor as celebrated as the battles of the Second War. Yet it captures the essence of what it means to face a guardian. Centuries ago, before Hogwarts had reached its full glory, a wizard of great ambition sought to prove his strength. He had heard of dragons nesting in the Welsh mountains, and he believed that to harness their fire would be to command respect among his peers. With spells prepared and a heart brimming with pride, he climbed into the Highlands. For days he tracked the creatures, until at last he reached a cavern marked with smoke and ash. Inside lay a mother dragon, her wings folded, guarding a clutch of eggs. The wizard raised his wand, intending not to kill but to control. Yet, in that moment, the dragon's eyes opened, golden and ancient. She rose, her scales glittering with firelight, her body filling the cavern with a presence beyond words. The wizard trembled, but his pride held him steady. He cast his spells, each one striking like sparks against armor. None pierced her hide. None dimmed her flame. With a roar that shook the mountain, the dragon unleashed her fire. not killing the intruder but driving him back, burned and humbled. He returned to his peers, not with a dragon's egg, nor a trophy of conquest, but with silence. And though some mocked him, others noticed a change. He became a man more measured, more cautious, less quick to boast. In the end, the dragon had given him something greater than power. She had given him perspective. Why does this story matter? Because it shows that guardians exist not to be conquered, but to be respected. Whether it is the Horntail in Harry's tournament, the merpeople beneath the Black Lake, or even the Grindylows lurking unseen, guardians teach us to recognize limits. They remind us that not all power is ours to wield. And here we might reflect. In the Muggle world, too, legends speak of guardians that stand at the edge of human ambition. Lions appear on shields to remind rulers of courage and duty. Sea serpents haunt maps at the edges of oceans, warning sailors of the dangers that lie beyond known waters. Dragons soar through myths from China to Scandinavia, sometimes as protectors, sometimes as destroyers, but always as beings that humans approach with awe rather than ownership. What we have learned, then, is this. Whether in the wizarding world or the Muggle one, guardians do more than protect treasures or territories. They protect meaning. They stand between ambition and arrogance, forcing those who approach them to decide. Will you respect what cannot be mastered, or will you reach too far and be burned? And so, as we leave these guardians behind, we must now ask a larger question. If creatures can humble wizards, what does it say about the institutions that claim to classify and control them? For it is not only individuals who encounter beasts, but entire governments, writing laws that decide what is beast, what is being, and what is something in between. It is here that we turn to the Ministry of Magic and to one man who dared to see creatures differently. Newt Scamander, author of Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, did not simply list creatures for their danger or their use. He listened to them, learned from them, and sought to protect them. His story stands as a counterpoint to the Ministry's rigid classifications, showing us that how we define a creature says as much about ourselves as it does about the creature. Up until now, our journey through magical creatures has been guided by encounters. Students facing boggarts in classrooms, champions standing before dragons, and Harry learning to see thestrals through the lens of grief. Yet beyond these personal stories lies something larger. The wizarding world does not only meet creatures, it governs them. Laws are written, categories defined, and entire offices at the Ministry of Magic decide who is a being, who is a beast, and who is something else entirely. The Ministry's Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures divides magical life into 3 categories: beasts, beings, and spirits. At first, this seems straightforward. Beasts are animals, beings are intelligent creatures capable of speech and governance, and spirits are non-corporeal entities like ghosts. But when we look closer, the lines blur. Take the centaurs. Intelligent, wise, and organized. They were once offered classification as beings. They refused. Why? Because they knew that wizard institutions rarely respected equality. They preferred to remain under the label of beast, free from the entanglements of wizard law. In their choice, we see not just pride, but a judgment on wizarding society itself. Or consider the house elves. By the Ministry's definition, they are beings, capable of speech and understanding. Yet for centuries they were treated as property. Laws did little to protect their dignity. It took Dobby's freedom, won through a sock, to reveal just how fragile wizarding notions of justice truly were. What does it mean that a society capable of classifying beings could still deny their rights? And then there are creatures like the merpeople. Officially classified as beings, they live in societies as structured as any wizard village. Yet many wizards still view them as curiosities or threats. Their culture is rarely acknowledged, their voices rarely heard in wizarding decision-making. Here, the Ministry's label means little if prejudice remains. In contrast to the Ministry stands Newt Scamander. His book, Fantastic Beasts, and Where to Find Them, is not merely a guide but a philosophy. Newt did not write from an office in London. He travelled, listened, and cared for creatures on their own terms. Where the Ministry sought control, he sought understanding. Where others saw danger, he saw ecosystems. Where many dismissed nifflers as pests or botricles as nuisances, Newt described them with respect, even affection. His work reminds us that classification is not neutral. It reflects the values of those who write it. And so, when we speak of institutions, we must ask, what does the way a society defines its creatures reveal about itself? The Ministry's rigid categories reveal its obsession with control. Newt's compassion reveals the possibility of coexistence. Both are part of the same wizarding world, and the tension between them continues to shape how wizards see the creatures around them. Perhaps the deeper lesson is this: a world is not only measured by the spells it casts or the castles it builds, but also by the way it treats those who share its space. To call a being a beast, to strip away voice and dignity, is to reveal more about wizard prejudice than about the creature itself. To kneel in a forest and write, as Newt did, with curiosity and care, is to choose a different kind of magic. So reflect for a moment. If you were handed the power to classify the creatures of the wizarding world, would you write the laws of the Ministry, neat and rigid? Or would you take Newt's path, walking into the wild and listening before you defined? To understand the wizarding world, it is easy to look first at the extraordinary. Dragons in tournaments, thestrals in forests, phoenixes in fire. Yet much of wizarding life is not shaped by the spectacular, but by the everyday creatures that quietly hold the community together. Picture, for a moment, the Great Hall of Hogwarts on an autumn evening. The tables are crowded with students, the air alive with chatter, and hundreds of owls swoop down from the rafters. Some drop parcels into laps, some deliver letters sealed in parchment, and some glide away to the owlery, feathers glinting in candlelight. For the students, this is routine. For us, it is worth pausing. The owl post is not just tradition, it is infrastructure. Without these creatures, the magical world would struggle to communicate across its distances. Hedwig carried Harry's letters faithfully, often across dangerous conditions, proving that even the smallest companion can shape a destiny. In the quieter corners of the castle, another story unfolds. Hermione's cat, Crookshanks, padded through the common room with his bottle-brush tail and squashed face. More than a pet, Crookshanks had intelligence beyond ordinary cats. He distrusted Scabbers the rat long before anyone else understood why, seeing through the animagus disguise of Peter Pettigrew. Here is a lesson. Sometimes it is the so-called domestic creatures that perceive truths wizards overlook. Beyond the walls of Hogwarts, creatures like puffskeins and pygmy puffs remind us of the softer side of magical life. Puffskeins, small and gentle, are known for their tendency to seek out leftovers, even sticking their tongues up sleeping wizards' noses to feed. According to Newt Scamander, their pygmy puff cousins became so popular that Fred and George Weasley sold them in cages lined with pink fluff at Weasley's Wizard Wheezes. What might seem trivial in lore reveals something deeper. Wizards do not only seek creatures for power or protection, they also seek companionship, affection, even comfort. And then consider the humble Kneazle. Crookshanks was part Kneazle himself, explaining his unusual intuition. Kneazles are highly intelligent, able to detect suspicious or untrustworthy individuals, and often bond fiercely with their chosen witch or wizard. Families who keep them are not only gaining a pet, but also a quiet guardian, one who sees what people sometimes cannot. From owls to Kneazles, from puffskeins to cats, these creatures reveal a truth that is easy to forget. The wizarding world does not stand apart from beasts. It relies on them daily, often without acknowledgement. Letters are delivered, secrets uncovered, companionship given, not by ministry officials or spittle work, but by creatures who share wizarding homes and halls. And here is the larger point. These creatures show us that magical life is not built only on wands and laws, but on relationships of trust, loyalty, and care. They teach wizards to depend on others, to see value in what is small, and to respect what is ordinary. When we speak of magical creatures, it is tempting to imagine them only in forests, lakes, and classrooms. Yet history shows us another reality. In times of war, beasts are drawn into conflicts, sometimes as allies, sometimes as weapons, sometimes as victims of human ambition. Picture the night of the Battle of Hogwarts. The castle stood under siege, its walls trembling with spells, its halls filled with smoke and cries. But it was not only wizards who fought that night. From the Forbidden Forest came giants, recruited by Voldemort, their clubs striking against stone, their roars echoing through the valley. They crushed walls, toppled defenses, and brought fear in their wake. These giants were not fighting for loyalty or belief. They were fighting because Voldemort had offered them a place in a world that had long shunned them. Their presence reveals the danger of neglect. When a society excludes a people, it should not be surprised when they stand on the side of those who promise them recognition, even if through fear. At the same time, the defenders of Hogwarts called on their own allies. From Hagrid's hut came the Acromantulas, released into the chaos. Aragog had long since died, but his children swarmed the battlefield, striking at Death Eaters and students alike. They fought not from allegiance, but from instinct, a reminder that once unleashed, some creatures cannot be controlled. Their role in the battle stands as a cautionary tale about the consequences of bringing wild power into human conflicts. Elsewhere, in the Wizarding Wars, other creatures were used more deliberately. Trolls were employed by Voldemort's forces during both wars, their strength unmatched, but their will bent by dark commands. The very same species that Harry, Ron, and Hermione encountered in the dungeons during their first year became tools of destruction on a larger scale. Their dull minds made them easy to exploit, yet their brute force made them devastating on the battlefield. And then there are the Fairy. Unlike giants or trolls, they are not natural creatures but corpses, reanimated through the darkest of magic. When Dumbledore and Harry entered the cave in search of the Locket Horcrux, they faced an army of the dead beneath the black water. These beings remind us of the most terrifying aspect of beasts in war. Sometimes they are not partners at all. Sometimes they are creations, stripped of dignity, reduced to weapons. What does it say about a wizard who chooses to create such an army? It reveals not strength, but fear, not mastery, but corruption. The stories of these creatures in battle lead us to a larger truth. When war comes, magical beings are rarely given a choice. They are pulled into the struggles of wizards, either as allies or as prey. Some, like the giants, fight for recognition they have long been denied. Others, like the Acromantulas, are unleashed without regard for consequence. Still others, like the Inferi, are twisted against their will into instruments of terror. So reflect on this. A society is not only judged by how it fights its wars, but by whom it drags into them. The wizarding world shows us that in times of conflict, the line between ally and victim, between weapon and being, becomes dangerously thin. There is a story told of the Second Wizarding War, not often written in textbooks, but remembered by those who were there. After the Battle of Hogwarts, when the smoke cleared and the dead were counted, Hagrid was seen carrying the body of an acromantula back into the forest. He was weeping, not because the creature had fought on his side, but because he believed, even in the chaos of war, it deserved dignity. His students saw in that moment a man whose love for creatures remained unbroken, even when those same creatures had caused terror and death. This story matters because it captures a larger truth. Wars do not only scar people, they scar the creatures pulled into them. Giants smashed against castle walls, acromantulas swarmed blindly through corridors, and Inferisols long departed were forced to walk again as weapons. None of these beings entered the war out of their own choosing. They were claimed, manipulated, or unleashed by wizards. Now pause for a moment and reflect. Is this not also true of the Muggle world? Horses carried soldiers across battlefields for centuries, often dying in numbers greater than the men who rode them. Dogs have been trained to guard, attack, even carry messages in times of war. In ancient armies, elephants were paraded as weapons. Their size and power used to terrify. Yet, in each case, these creatures were not fighting for their own cause. They were swept into human ambition, and beyond living creatures, Muggles to have created symbols that function much like beasts in battle. The eagle, the lion, the dragon emblems on shields, banners, and uniforms served not only as decoration, but as guardians of identity, carrying the weight of courage, power, or fear. Just as Voldemort summoned giants to project terror, so to have Muggle rulers raised banners of beasts to rally their armies. The educational point here is subtle but important. When we look at how wizards use beasts in war, we are really looking at ourselves. These choices reveal not just strategy, but values. Do we honor creatures as allies, as Hagrid did even in grief? Or do we treat them as disposable weapons, as Voldemort did with trolls and so we must ask the deeper question. If war is the moment when a society shows its true face, what does the use of creatures in wizarding wars say about the wizarding world? Perhaps it reveals both its cruelty and its compassion, its capacity to exploit, but also its potential to respect. This reflection guides us toward our next topic. For if beasts appear in wars and myths alike, what happens when they cross into Muggle life more directly? What happens when creatures refuse to remain hidden? When Kelpies churn the waters of Loch Ness, or Sphinx prowl at the edge of mazes, or Obscurials tear through city streets? This is where the boundary between magical and mundane begins to blur. There is a lake in the Scottish Highlands that Muggles know well. Its waters are deep, its mists thick, and its stories older than memory. They call it Loch Ness, and for decades Muggles have whispered of a monster that dwells beneath its surface. They picture a long-necked serpent rising out of the water with ancient eyes. They imagine photographs blurred with mystery and boats rocking on waves with no clear cause. What they do not know, but what every wizarding historian confirms, is that this monster is not a myth at all. It is a Kelpie, the largest in the world. A shapeshifter, capable of luring the unwary, dragging them into the depths, and feeding on their fear. Wizards have tried to control it, even restrict its movements with spells. But the Kelpie of Loch Ness delights in breaking free. It leaps and crashes at the surface whenever the Ministry attempts to impose its will. In its defiance, it has become the most famous magical creature in the Muggle world, disguised not as a secret but as a legend. This raises a troubling question. If Muggles are forbidden knowledge of the wizarding world, what happens when creatures refuse to stay hidden? The Statute of Secrecy was written in 1692 precisely to prevent magical exposure. Yet creatures like the Loch Ness Kelpie remind us that not all of magic agrees to be bound. Wizards may hide dragons in remote valleys, conceal thestrals within forests, and build wards around dangerous beasts, but secrecy is always fragile. Think of the basilisk that once prowled beneath Hogwarts. For centuries it lay hidden, until one day it emerged to claim lives and expose truths. Or the obscurials described in modern accounts, magical outbursts born from repression. They cannot be concealed forever. They erupt into Muggle streets, tearing down the very barriers the Ministry works so desperately to uphold. This is where we begin a thought loop that we will close later. For now, hold the question in your mind. What if magical creatures are not only residents of their world, but challengers of its boundaries? What if their very existence undermines the secrecy that wizards depend on? Before we return to this idea, let us widen our view. For in both the wizarding and the Muggle worlds, beasts have always existed at the edge of belief. Muggles imagine dragons in ancient caves, serpents coiled around oceans, and unicorns prancing through medieval forests. Wizards, meanwhile, know these creatures not as stories, but as neighbors, companions, and sometimes adversaries. The divide between the two worlds is not as wide as it seems. The Muggles see myth, where wizards see reality. Yet both are reaching toward the same truth, that the world is larger, stranger, and more alive than we can fully grasp. So reflect with me. If Muggles already dream of kelpies and phoenixes, if they draw dragons on maps and paint unicorns in stained glass, is it truly possible for secrecy to hold forever? Or will the creatures themselves, restless and proud, always remind both worlds of their presence? Hold that question close. When we arrive at the sacred and the cursed, we will return to it. We will ask whether some creatures exist not to be hidden at all, but to test the limits of secrecy itself. Not all magical creatures live in forests, lakes, or mountains. Some live within wizards themselves, revealed only when called upon, cursed, or transformed. These are the beings that blur the line between beast and human, teaching lessons not about the natural world, but about the inner one. Let us begin with the Patronus. Unlike dragons or merpeople, a Patronus is not a creature you encounter in the wild. It is a conjured guardian, a manifestation of a wizard's deepest self. When Harry first learned the charm under Lupin's guidance, what emerged was a stag, the same animal that had been his father's animagus form. It was not a random shape. It was an echo of memory, family, and identity. For others, a Patronus might be a hare, a dog, or even a phoenix. Each one whispers a truth about the caster's character, often more honestly than words could. A Patronus is both shield and mirror, proof that magic can reveal what the soul carries. Yet reflection is not always so noble. Consider the animagus, a witch or wizard who can transform at will into an animal. James Potter became a stag, Sirius Black a great black dog, and Peter Pettigrew a rat. Each form reflected something within them: courage, loyalty, deceit. But animagi also raise questions about control. Is it mastery to transform, or is it surrender to a hidden self? Rita Skeeter, an unregistered animagus, turned into a beetle to spy and manipulate. Her form suited her nature, revealing how easily a gift can become a weapon. And then there is the werewolf, perhaps the most tragic example of all. Remus Lupin lived with a curse that transformed him into a beast under the full moon. Unlike Animagi, he had no choice. His condition brought stigma, fear, and exclusion. Not because he was dangerous every day, but because society could not look past the creature he became once a month. Lupin himself was gentle, wise, and devoted. Yet wizards who saw only the beast treated him as less than human. In his story, we find a mirror not only of personal struggle, but of communal prejudice. Wizards feared what he might become, and in that fear revealed their own cruelty. What unites Patronuses, Animagi, and werewolves is the way they collapse the divide between human and creature. They remind us that the boundaries are not absolute. Sometimes, what we fear in beasts is what we fear in ourselves. Sometimes, what we admire in them is what we long for in our own nature. So, reflect on this. If your Patronus revealed your truest self, would you welcome it? If you could take an animagus form, would you embrace the creature it gave you? And if you bore a curse like Lupin's, how would you want others to see you not as a beast to be shunned, but as a person still worthy of dignity? Here, the wizarding world invites us to look inward. Creatures are not only companions or enemies, they are mirrors. They show us that the line between wizard and beast is thin, and perhaps always has been. And now, as we prepare to turn to the sacred and the cursed, hold on to the question we left open in the last chapter. If creatures can live within us, if they can reflect truths about identity, can they also reveal truths about secrecy and power? In the next chapter, we will return to that thought, for sacred beasts and cursed beings often resist concealment altogether. They remind wizards that some creatures do not just inhabit the world, they challenge its very structure. Throughout this journey, we have seen creatures as companions, as guardians, as reflections of the soul. Yet there are some beings that exist on the edge of myth and terror. Creatures so bound to magic itself that they resist being hidden or tamed. They are sacred in their symbolism, cursed in their presence, and they force us to confront the limits of wizarding secrecy and control. Let us begin beneath the very floors of Hogwarts. For centuries, the basilisk slumbered within the Chamber of Secrets, coiled in darkness, waiting for a master who could speak the language of serpents. When Tom Riddle unleashed it in the 1940s, it brought death to Myrtle Warren. When it rose again decades later, it petrified students and nearly killed Ginny Weasley. Its gaze was fatal, its fangs venomous, and yet it was not only its danger that mattered, it was its secrecy. A creature of that magnitude lay hidden in the heart of the most famous school in the wizarding world. No ministry official detected it. No protective spell revealed it. The basilisk teaches us that even the most guarded institutions can harbor shadows too vast to remain hidden forever. From the chamber beneath the castle, let us move to the maze of the Triwizard Tournament, where Harry encountered the Sphinx. Unlike the basilisk, it was not unleashed to kill, but to test. The Sphinx demanded a riddle, a challenge of wit rather than strength. Its very presence shows us that some creatures are woven into the fabric of magical trials, guardians not only of treasures but of knowledge. The Sphinx does not simply block a path, it forces a choice. Answer wisely and pass. Fail and face the claws. In this way it represents magic as both gift and trial, a sacred reminder that wisdom, not brute force, is the measure of worth. And then, far from Hogwarts, there is the Letterfold. Rare, almost mythic, it drifts through the night like a shadow made flesh, smothering its victims silently as they sleep. Dark wizards and fearful travelers whisper its name, for it cannot be repelled by ordinary magic. Only the Patronus charm, a spell of pure hope, can drive it back. What does this reveal? that some creatures exist as embodiments of dread itself, demanding not cunning nor knowledge, but the deepest reserves of human resilience. The letherfold is both beast and metaphor, showing that in the darkest places, light must come from within. Now recall the thought we left open 2 chapters ago. What if creatures do not only inhabit the world, but challenge the very boundaries of secrecy? The basilisk, hidden in Hogwarts, could not remain a secret forever. The Sphinx, imported into a maze, could not be disguised as anything but myth made real. The letherfold, drifting in shadows, slips through the edges of wizarding lore. Each of these creatures reminds us that the statute of secrecy is never absolute. Magic resists silence. Creatures, sacred or cursed, force wizards to confront truths that concealment cannot erase. And here lies the reflection. Perhaps these beings exist not only as beasts but as tests. Tests of humility, wisdom, and courage. Tests of whether secrecy can hold, or whether magic will always spill into the world, reshaping it. Tests that do not ask whether wizards can win, but whether they can learn. Let me return the question to you. If the wizarding world depends on secrecy, yet its greatest creatures resist being hidden, what does that tell us about the future of that world? Is it truly possible to silence the roar of a dragon, the song of a mermaid, the gaze of a basilisk? Or will the creatures themselves always carry the truth beyond the walls, into legend, into myth, and perhaps into memory? When we think of the basilisk coiled beneath Hogwarts, the Sphinx guarding its riddle, or the letherfold drifting like a living shadow, it is tempting to see them as uniquely wizarding. Yet pause for a moment and notice how closely they echo the creatures of Muggle faith and folklore. In Muggle traditions, the sacred is often guarded by creatures beyond human measure. Angels with wings of fire stand at the gates of paradise. Serpents whisper in gardens, their venom both temptation and curse. Demons drift at the edge of human sight, feeding not on flesh but on fear. The wizarding basilisk feels like the serpent magnified, the letherfold like the nightmare made flesh, the Sphinx like the riddle at the threshold of wisdom. Wizards may call them beasts, but Muggles have long called them symbols. The commentary here is worth pausing on. Wizards often dismiss Muggle myths as half-remembered fragments, scraps of truth twisted by imagination. Yet perhaps the reverse is true. Perhaps Muggles, without seeing, still grasp at the same lessons. Both worlds have always sensed that some creatures do not simply live. They test, they ask questions, they guard what is precious, whether life, knowledge, or hope. Take the basilisk again. In wizarding lore, its gaze kills. In Muggle legend, serpents also embody danger and forbidden knowledge. Both tell the same story, that wisdom without humility is perilous. Or think of the Sphinx. To Harriet posed a riddle. In Greek myth, the Sphinx did the same, devouring those who failed. Both remind us that truth is not handed freely. It must be earned. And the letherfold, nearly invisible, suffocating its prey, recalls the demons of Muggle imagination that creep in silence and strike at night. Both are warnings about the unseen, about complacency in the face of shadow. This comparison invites reflection. Perhaps the line between wizard and Muggle is not as sharp as the Ministry would have us believe. Wizards may encounter the creatures in flesh, Muggles in story, but both return to the same truths. That life is guarded, that wisdom requires courage, that fear, if left unchallenged, will suffocate. So let us carry this thought as we move forward. If sacred and cursed creatures embody universal lessons, then surely they must appear beyond Britain, beyond Hogwarts, across the world, What do other wizarding cultures see when they meet the Thunderbird, the Zuwu, the Nundu? What myths do they share with their Muggle neighbors? And what truths do they carry across continents? It is here that we step into our next chapter, Cross-Cultural Creatures and Global Traditions, where we explore how magical beings reflect not only nature, but the diversity of wizarding communities across the globe. The wizarding world does not end at the borders of Britain. Its creatures roam continents, skies, forests, and seas, each tied to the culture that names them, fears them, or reveres them. To understand magical creatures fully, we must step beyond Hogwarts and see how wizards across the globe encounter their own guardians, companions, and mysteries. Let us begin in North America with the Thunderbird. It is said that Isolde Serre, founder of Ilvermorny School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, encountered a thunderbird in the wilderness after fleeing persecution in Europe. The great bird spread its wings, vast enough to shadow the ground, and the air filled with the rumble of storms. Its very wing beats were said to create thunder, and its presence carried an air of majesty that demanded reverence rather than fear. Inspired, Isolde named one of Ilvermorny's 4 houses after the creature, honoring its spirit of adventure and the storms of transformation it represented. Even today, students sorted into Thunderbird House are known for their love of travel and discovery. What does this story teach us? That the Thunderbird is not only a beast, but a cultural symbol. To the wizarding community of North America, it embodies resilience, survival, and the promise of new beginnings. Its storms are not destruction, but renewal, cleansing the air so that life may flourish again. Travel east, and you will find the Zuwu of Chinese lore. Enormous in size, with a mane of vivid colors and a stride so long it can cross 1,000 miles in a day. The Zuwu is both ferocious and surprisingly gentle. In Fantastic Beasts, The Crimes of Grindelwald, Newt Scamander calmed one with ease, showing that compassion, not force, is the true way to meet it. For centuries, Chinese wizarding culture has regarded the Zuwu as a creature of both power and benevolence, feared by those who do not understand it, but respected by those who do. Across these cultures, a pattern emerges. Just as the phoenix embodies rebirth in Britain, the Thunderbird represents storms and change in North America. The Zuwu, balance and speed in China, and the Nundu, the sheer scale of nature's danger in Africa. These creatures are not simply beasts on a list. They are reflections of the communities that live alongside them, shaped by the values, fears, and hopes of those who tell their stories. Now reflect with me. If each culture has its own legendary beasts, do they not serve as bridges between the wizarding and Muggle worlds alike? Muggles tell of dragons in Europe, Thunderbirds in Native American tradition, and great lions across Africa. Wizards meet these creatures as realities, yet the truths they carry power, transformation, resilience are shared across both worlds. The lesson is simple but profound. Magical creatures do not only challenge wizards, they also connect them. Across cultures and continents, they weave a shared language of awe, danger, and wonder, reminding us that magic is not the property of one nation, but the breath of the world itself. If we listen closely, creatures tell us as much about wizards as they do about themselves. Each culture, each community, reflects its own values in the way it treats magical beasts. The stories we just explored, the Thunderbird of North America, the Zuwu of China, the Nundu of Africa, become more than encounters. They become mirrors of cultural identity. Consider North America again. The Thunderbird is not only a creature of storms, but a cornerstone of Ilvermorny's identity. To be sorted into Thunderbird House is to be seen as adventurous, restless, drawn to discovery. In this way, the Thunderbird is not only a beast of the wilderness, it is woven into the very framework of wizarding education. Compare this to Hogwarts, where no creature stands as the symbol of a house. Here we see a cultural difference. In America, beasts are honored as guiding archetypes, while in Britain, houses are defined by human founders. Which approach tells us more about how each community sees itself. Now turn to China, where the zoo's immense size and dazzling colors inspire both fear and reverence. When Newt encountered one in Paris, it had been caged, frightened, and enraged by mistreatment. Yet with patience and kindness he calmed it, proving what Chinese law already held, that the Zhuwu is not savage by nature. It is a creature of power that responds to understanding. Its place in Chinese magical tradition is not as a weapon, but as a reminder that strength and gentleness can coexist. A culture that recognizes this truth reveals its own values: respect for balance, harmony, and control through compassion rather than force. Africa, by contrast, is home to the Nundu, a beast that resists human influence almost entirely. Its silent movements and deadly breaths make it an enduring challenge, one that even hundreds of wizards together struggle to contain. Yet, what do African wizards do with this knowledge? They record, they warn, and they respect. The Nundu is not hunted for glory or trophies, for its danger is absolute. Instead, it is acknowledged as part of the natural order, a reminder of humility. Here we see a cultural stance that embraces coexistence with forces too great to command, rather than seeking domination. Even within Europe, contrasts emerge. The basilisk was hidden in Hogwarts as a weapon of prejudice, unleashed to cleanse the school of Muggleborns. Yet elsewhere, sphinxes were used in controlled settings, such as the Triwizard Tournament, where their riddles tested wit rather than blood. Both are sacred creatures, but their uses reveal different cultural choices, one of hatred, the other of trial. And what of Britain's own approach, reflected in Newt Scamander? His fantastic beasts, and where to find them, does not categorize creatures as tools or enemies, but as beings with dignity and complexity. Newt's compassion stands in contrast to the Ministry of Magic, which too often classifies beasts by their danger rather than their worth. The divide is telling. When Newt represents empathy and understanding, the Ministry represents fear and control. Here is the reflection. Wizards across the world live with creatures that embody storms, speed, silence, or wisdom. Yet the truer revelation is in the choices they make. Do they cage, or do they honor? Do they fear, or do they respect? Do they seek mastery, or do they seek balance? So I invite you to wonder, if we were to step into another wizarding culture, what would its creatures reveal about its people? For in every Thunderbird, every Zhuwu, every Nundu, there is not just a beast, but a mirror. Imagine, for a moment, a future wizarding world where the statute of secrecy no longer holds. The veil between Muggles and wizards has fallen, not by war or betrayal, but by inevitability. Perhaps it was a dragon, sighted one too many times, or a Kelpie breaking free in a crowded lake, or even a Muggle-born child summoning a patroness on a city street. However it happens, the world awakens to the reality of magic. Now, ask yourself what becomes of the creatures. Would Muggles, finally seeing Thestrals, treat them with reverence for the truth of death, or would they fear them as omens? Would the Phoenix, so central to wizarding symbolism, become a global icon of renewal, its tears sought by those desperate for healing? Or would its rarity lead to exploitation, the same way unicorn blood was once abused? This hypothetical is not far from the lessons we have already traced. When wizards first faced dragons in the Triwizard Tournament, They learned that raw power cannot be caged. When they relied on Dementors for law and order, they learned that fear cannot be trusted as justice. When Harry learned to see Thestrals, he discovered that grief itself was a teacher. If these truths hold within the wizarding world, how much more powerful would they become if revealed to all? Here is the canon thread that grounds this thought. The International Confederation of Wizards, in drafting the Statute of Secrecy in 1692, did so not only to protect wizards, but also to protect creatures. Dragons, giants, and merpeople could not live freely in a world where Muggles hunted, feared, and misunderstood them. The statute was an attempt at coexistence through separation. But what if separation fails? What if coexistence must be face to face? The hypothetical forces us to ask what kind of society wizards would build then. Would they repeat the mistakes of the Ministry, classifying creatures rigidly as beasts or beings, always through the lens of control? Or would they follow the path of Newt Scamander, choosing compassion, conservation, and dialogue? And here lies the larger point. Magical creatures are not just curiosities of lore. They are the test of wizarding values. Each encounter, whether with Buckbeak, with the Thunderbird, or with the Basilisk, reveals not only the nature of the creature, but the nature of the wizard standing before it. So, reflect on this hypothetical with me. If the veil fell tomorrow and every Muggle could see what wizards see, would the world descend into fear and hunting? Or would creatures, finally revealed as real, become the teachers humanity has always imagined them to be in myth? The answer may not depend on the beasts at all, but on us. If creatures are mirrors of culture, they are also resources that sustain wizarding life. Wands, potions, enchantments, even the coins in one's pocket are touched by the bodies of beasts. The question is not whether wizards use creatures, but whether they use them wisely. Consider the wand. The core of a wizard's most personal tool is always a gift from a magical creature. Ollivander's tradition is clear. Phoenix, feather, unicorn hair, dragon heartstring. Each core carries not only magical properties, but ethical weight. Phoenix feathers are rare and freely given. Unicorn hair is shed without harm. But dragon heartstring requires death. Already, the wand itself asks us to reflect. Is magic powered by cooperation or by conquest? The Elder Wand pushes this reflection further. Its core was Thestral tailhair, a reminder that death itself underpinned its legend. A wand of immense power, born not of loyalty or shedding, but of a creature tied to grief and invisibility. What does it mean that the most infamous wand in history is rooted in mortality? Beyond wands, potions reveal another layer of dependence. Slughorn harvested venom from Aragog's corpse, not out of compassion, but profit. Erumpent horn, explosive when mishandled, sat dangerously in Xenophilius Lovegood's house. A reminder of how easily creature materials slip into wizard hands without care. Jobberknoll feathers, essential for potions of memory and truth, are taken at the bird's death cry. Even Occamy eggshells, pure silver, tempt wizards into trade rather than conservation. The Ministry has responded with regulation. The ban on experimental breeding of 1965, the dragon breeding ban of 1709, the controlled trade of substances like powdered bicorn horn. Yet laws do not erase demand. A bezoar, taken from a goat's stomach, can save a life from poison. What wizard will refuse it if the need is desperate? So the ethical question remains. Does use destroy dignity, or can it coexist with respect? Newt Scamander wrote with compassion of botricles, whose twigs are prized for wand-making. Yet he cautioned that their trees must be guarded with care. In his view, taking must be balanced with giving, use with stewardship. Reflect, then. If your wand's core came from a creature, would you see it as a partnership or as a theft? In the answer lies the heart of wizard ethics. From ethics, let us move to utility. Magical creatures are not only mirrors or symbols, they are workers, powering wizarding travel and guarding wizarding treasure. At Hogwarts, Thestrals draw the carriages, seen only by those who have faced death. Their quiet strength carries students year after year, often without recognition. In France, the Boxbatons carriage is pulled by winged Abrasons, massive and proud, so large they demand single malt whiskey to remain calm. The Durmstrang ship, while not creature-powered, reminds us, by contrast, how other schools depend on the living world for travel. Wizards have long used winged horses for flightathonins, chestnut and fiery, and Granians, swift and silver grey. Yet international law forbids their use without a proper disillusionment charm. Again, the statute of secrecy bends around creatures because a horse in the sky is difficult to hide. And then there are dragons, not as transport but as guardians. Gringotts Bank infamously chained a Ukrainian ironbelly in its lowest vaults, blind and scarred by decades of captivity. Its roars echoed through the tunnels until Harry, Hermione, and Ron freed it during their break-in. Here we see the darkest side of magical utility. A magnificent beast reduced to a prison warden, its freedom stolen for the sake of wealth. When it burst into the skies of London, scarred wings beating against the air, it was not vengeance that stirred the world, but liberation. Even owls, humble in comparison, are part of this labor. They carry messages tirelessly, day and night, across continents. Each wizard's daily correspondence depends on their wings. Yet how rarely are they acknowledged as more than tools? The pattern is clear. Creatures have long powered wizard transport, labor, and security. The lesson is equally clear. When partnership slips into exploitation, the world itself pushes back, whether in a freed dragon, an untamed Abraxan, or the silent dignity of a Thestral. Not all creatures are noble symbols or mighty guardians. Some are simply nuisances, challenging wizard patience in kitchens, gardens, and corridors. Yet even the smallest pests reveal truths about magical life. Cornish pixies, released by Gilderoy Lockhart in a moment of foolish bravado, caused chaos in the classroom, pulling ears and smashing glass. They are mischievous, not deadly, but their strength is greater than their size suggests. Doxies, infesting curtains at Grimmauld Place, required careful use of doxycide. Their venom is dangerous, yet they breed icily, a reminder of how magical homes require constant vigilance. At the Burrow, the Weasleys waged war on gnomes in the garden, tossing them over hedges in a ritual of domestic life. Harmless, yet irritating, gnomes show how wizarding households live not only with grand enchantments, but with small battles of maintenance. Other pests are more sinister. Redcaps lurk in places of bloodshed, striking the unwary. Hinkypunks lure travelers with a lantern, leading them into bogs. Chitspurfles infest magical objects, chewing wand core and broomsticks alike, forcing repairs that no spell can undo. In these minor creatures, we see the texture of daily magical life. Not every encounter is heroic. Sometimes it is tedious, frustrating, even comic. Yet the lesson is the same as with dragons and thestrals. Magic is a world shared. Safety and coexistence require knowledge, vigilance, and humility. So reflect with me. If you lived in the wizarding world, would you fear the basilisk in the chamber, or would you curse the pixies in your kitchen more often? Both remind us that creatures, great and small, shape life in ways we cannot ignore. We have wandered far together, from the shadows of the Forbidden Forest to the storm-filled skies above North America, from the still waters of the Black Lake to the hidden chambers beneath Hogwarts itself. Along the way, creatures have shown us fear, wonder, guardianship, labor, nuisance, and reflection. Each encounter was not only with a beast, but with a truth. We learned that dark creatures like boggarts and dementors do not only threaten, they reveal our deepest fears and test the structures meant to contain them. We saw companions like Hedwig and Crookshanks remind us that loyalty and intuition often come from the quietest corners of magical life. We walked with Thestrals and Phoenixes, learning that renewal and grief are woven into the very fabric of existence. We stood before dragons and merpeople, recognizing that guardianship can be fire or law, but always demands respect. Institutions taught us another lesson. The Ministry's categories of beast, being, and spirit reflect more about wizard prejudice than about the creatures themselves. Newt Scamander, by contrast, showed us what compassion and observation can achieve when law falls short. Even the smallest pests, from gnomes to pixies, reminded us that coexistence is not a matter of grand heroics, but of patience, vigilance, and care. And through it all, a deeper message took shape. Magical creatures are not just part of the wizarding world, they are its teachers. They humble ambition, expose cruelty, test courage, and reward compassion. They reveal that the world is shared, and that true power lies not in control but in respect. So let us turn this lesson into a message. If you measure a society, do not look first at its castles or its spells. Look at how it treats its creatures, for there you will see its values laid bare. Fear breeds exploitation. Wisdom breeds coexistence. And in that choice lies the future not only of the wizarding world, but of any world. Now, though our path through this lecture slows, I will not close the door entirely. For the wizarding world is wide, its forests deep, its oceans endless. There are creatures we have not yet named, stories we have not yet heard, lessons still waiting to be drawn. When the time comes, we may return together and listen once more. Until then, hold this thought close. Every creature, whether dragon or doxy, thestral or phoenix, asks us the same question. Will you meet me with fear or with respect? The answer to that question is the measure of who we truly are. And so, our long walk among the beasts draws into quiet. We have studied their shadows and their brilliance, traced them across continents, and listened as they revealed truths about fear, wonder, power, and compassion. Yet knowledge alone does not keep the wizarding world alive. Stories do. They move through corridors and common rooms, across oceans and mountains, carried in whispers and firelight. They remind us that law is never still. It breathes through those who live it, which is why, before we close the book entirely, we turn a page into something different. Not a catalogue, not a lecture, but a story. For what better way to test what we have learned than to follow a witch or wizard as they step into the very world we have studied? A world where beasts stir in forests, secrets linger in stone, and every decision bends toward mystery. And so we shift our gaze northward to a castle carved against the winter wind. Its towers gleam with snow, its hearths glow with old fire, and its traditions cut as sharply as the ice that surrounds it. This is where our next journey begins, where history, magic, and ambition weave themselves into a living tale. The winters around Durmstrang bite hard, yet the castle glows warm against the snow. Firelight drifts from tall windows, spilling across the frozen lake, as though the school itself wishes to be seen. It is a place that carries pride in its shadows and secrets in its stones. Those who study here are taught resilience not only through spells, but through silence. Where lessons linger longer than they are spoken, Selene Vera arrives at 23. her presence turning heads not only for beauty, but for the quiet confidence that follows her into every corridor. She carries herself like someone who already knows the room is watching, yet her smile suggests she enjoys pretending otherwise. Books and parchment are her excuse for travel, but her true pursuit is less obvious curiosity. Always restless, always reaching beyond what is allowed. Conversations with her carry the same rhythm as her spectral work. A glance held a little longer than needed, a laugh that softens the edge of rivalry, a question framed so it feels like an invitation. Selene does not demand attention. She collects it gently, until others lean closer without realizing why. Her charm is not in performance, but in presence, leaving even the sternest professors unsettled by how icily they wish to favor her. Durmstrang offers her history and danger in equal measure. Torchlit duels, whispered rumors of artifacts buried beneath stone, and the steady hum of ambition that fills the air. Yet Selene moves through it with a grace that unsettles darkness itself, reminding those around her that not every mystery must be solved through fear. Sometimes it is enough to follow her voice, warm in the cold, daring in its quiet promise that even in the most secret corners of the wizarding world, there is beauty in simply being seen. The wind swept over the lake in slow, icy breaths, carrying with it the faint smell of pine and the sharper taste of iron from the mountains beyond. Durmstrang Castle rose out of the darkness like something half-remembered, its towers glowing faintly against the snow. It was not Hogwarts, nor did it want to be. Its walls did not welcome. They challenged. Selene Vera tightened her cloak, though the cold hardly bothered her. She found herself smiling, lips tinged with frost, as though the place had whispered something only she was meant to hear. Durmstrang had a reputation for severity, for discipline, for producing wizards who prized power as much as pride. Yet standing at the edge of the frozen lake, she thought it looked almost playful, like a stern professor who secretly enjoyed a clever student's mischief. Inside, the halls hummed with quiet. Her boots clicked softly against stone floors as portraits turned their heads to follow her. Most of them seemed unimpressed, their eyes narrowed, their expressions guarded. She tilted her chin upward just enough to answer their scrutiny, the ghost of a smile brushing her face. "Charmed, I'm sure," she murmured under her breath, offering a subtle wink to a particularly sour-looking wizard framed in heavy gilt. For the briefest second, the portrait blinked in surprise, and Selene laughed quietly, a sound like silk against stone. The library drew her almost immediately. It was vast, colder than she expected, with shelves reaching into shadowed rafters. Dust clung to the air, stirred with each careful turn of a page. She trailed her fingers along spines of books, too ancient for titles, each one humming faintly with magic, as though it remembered every hand that had opened it. It was there she met him, a student, perhaps a year or two younger, sharp-featured, his posture stiff with suspicion. He had been watching her for some time, she realized, though he tried to appear buried in a text on rune theory. "You must be new," he said finally, his voice clipped but steady. Selene turned, letting her gaze rest on him longer than necessary. His ears flushed slightly under the weight of it. She smiled, soft and knowing. "New," she replied, tilting her head, but not lost. "You look like someone who expects strangers to beg for direction." His lips parted, caught between protest and curiosity. She could feel his guard shift, just slightly, and she allowed the silence to linger, a deliberate pause that made him lean forward without realizing it. "I'm Selene," she offered, her voice quiet enough that he had to lean closer still. "And you are?" "Arvid," he said quickly, almost too quickly, as though the name had escaped him before he had planned to give it. "Arvid," she repeated, tasting the name as though it were something rare. A strong name, fitting for someone who watches the library so carefully. He shifted, unsure whether she meant praise or tease, and she let the tension hang. Then, with a graceful motion, she closed the book in front of her and stood. "Well, Arvid," she said, her eyes catching his just long enough to stir the heat in his cheeks again. "You will have to tell me which shelves hold the books Durmstrang doesn't want me to find." Her tone was light, playful, but threaded with something more. A dare, perhaps. A promise. He swallowed hard, and for the first time, the severe quiet of the library felt warmer. The winters around Durmstrang pressed heavy against the mountains, yet Selene Vera seemed untouched by their severity. Where others hunched into their cloaks and hurried through the cold, she walked slowly, as if the snow itself parted for her. The castle's torches threw restless shadows across her figure, and even those shadows seemed reluctant to let her go. Her beauty did not need to be announced. It revealed itself in layers, like a charm that deepened the longer one watched. Her face carried symmetry too precise to be accidental, softened by lips that hinted at secrets and eyes that lingered long enough to disarm. Dark hair fell against her shoulders, catching light as though it had conspired with the fire to frame her every expression. She moved with grace that was neither rehearsed nor self-conscious, but innate, hips swaying with the rhythm of someone who knew the room always bent quietly in her favor. Her bust, poised and proud, drew eyes just as readily, yet never crudely. It was part of the whole, balanced, commanding admiration rather than indulgence. Men, young and old alike, found themselves stilled in her presence, as though time itself slowed for them to notice. Their thoughts scattered, words dissolved before reaching their lips, replaced only by the awareness of her nearness. Even portraits turned subtly in their frames, unable to feign indifference, while students shifted in their seats as if gravity itself had been altered. Yet her beauty was not a wall of distance. It drew rather than repelled, a magnetism wrapped in warmth. She carried herself not as one untouchable, but as one who allowed others to believe they had glimpsed something rare, even if only for a moment. The library received her in silence. Books towered around her, dust catching the air in soft spirals, parchment whispering as though aware of her attention. She drifted through the aisles with a deliberate slowness, trailing fingers along spines that hummed faintly with ancient enchantments. Every gesture was precise, every tilt of her head an invitation to watch longer than one should. Even the cold stones seemed less severe beneath her steps, as if she softened the harshness of the place by merely existing within it. The library's air was colder than the corridors, but magic lingered thick as candle smoke. Shelves stretched high into shadow, some etched with runes that glowed faintly as if still remembering the hands that carved them centuries ago. Durmstrang's reputation lived in these walls. Where Hogwarts trained loyalty and camaraderie, Durmstrang prized resilience and mastery. Where Boaksbattens polished elegance, here knowledge was sharpened like a blade. Selene moved as though she belonged to all three worlds at once. Her beauty drew the eye, but it was the way she engaged the silence that unsettled those around her. She drifted between shelves, pausing where volumes of spellcraft resisted their bindings, where blood-red ink described practices banned in other schools, where histories avoided by the ministry were preserved in deliberate secrecy. She let her hand hover over a cracked tome bound in dragonhide, remembering whispered warnings from Boaksbattens about Durmstrang's archives. Tales of students who had sought out curses buried in forgotten pages, of professors who measured respect not by kindness but by the scars left from duels. This place carried not only knowledge but pride in the shadows it kept. The unforgivable curses were studied here long before the Ministry dared to speak their names aloud. Even Grindelwald had once walked these halls, his hunger for power nurtured in the same air she now breathed. Yet Selene's allure softened the severity of these truths. Her hips swayed in rhythm with the quiet crackle of enchanted torches. Her bust poised with natural confidence, each curve balanced as if shaped to unsettle without offense. Students pretended to read, but found their eyes straying, drawn not only by her beauty, but by the calm self-assurance with which she carried it. She did not demand notice. She invited it, weaving it into the space around her as effortlessly as the scent of parchment and ink. In her presence, even the library seemed to bend. Quills paused above parchment, portraits leaned subtly from their frames, and the enchanted ceiling above flickered with soft starlight, as though the castle itself had taken interest. Selene was more than a visitor. She was a reminder of why beauty and knowledge often unsettled power. She traced her fingers along another spine, this one labelled in Old Norse. It spoke of runes once used to bind creatures older than wizards themselves, the kind of lore Hogwarts might have hidden deep within the restricted section. Here it was simply placed within reach, as if Durmstrang wished to test not whether one could resist temptation, but whether one was strong enough to survive indulging it. Selene's journey east had not been sudden. She had grown restless after Bokusbattens, where elegance was taught as carefully as spellcraft, and where tradition often masked mediocrity. Her brilliance outshone her peers, but praise quickly became routine, and routine suffocated her. The wizarding world beyond France whispered of mysteries older than textbooks, and those whispers drew her to Durmstrang, where shadows promised the knowledge Hogwarts and Bokusbattens preferred to forget. Her family had old English ties, names occasionally traced in the genealogies of pureblood houses, though never in bold letters. At Hogwarts, her ancestors would have been overlooked, absorbed into greater lineages, remembered only through faint connections to the Blacks or the Pruitts. But Selene carried no interest in inherited pride. Her allure was her own, her presence crafted not by birthright, but by a cultivated grace that turned heads wherever she walked. Durmstrang's professors noted her heritage with faint recognition, but spoke little of it. What mattered here was not bloodline, but strength, resilience in dueling, courage in study, endurance in the face of magic that tested morality itself. In the dueling halls she was a vision. Wands, raised against her, faltered at the tilt of her smile. Spells broken not only by counter-charms, but by the steady rhythm of her confidence. Her bust rose with every measured breath, her hips shifting with poise as she moved details that unsettled even opponents trained to notice nothing but stance and spell. The lore she sought tied her to places well beyond Durmstrang. She read of the Department of Mysteries in London, where records of time itself were hidden, and compared them to theories preserved in Norse runes that hinted at similar experiments long before the Ministry's halls existed. She studied curses described in fragments of parchment that echoed the same cruelty that would one day stain wizarding lore as unforgivable. She traced notes of ancient alchemy that paralleled Nicholas Flamel's work, though Durmstrang credited the knowledge to Eastern sages lost to history. Every discovery deepened her connection to the wider world. Hogwarts taught belonging through feasts and Quidditch. Bokusbattens emphasized beauty and refinement. But Durmstrang gave her something rarer, the sense that knowledge, however dark, was still part of culture, still part of survival. It revealed to her the wizarding world not as scattered schools, but as a network of traditions, each carrying strengths and flaws, each shaping how witches and wizards endured through centuries of secrecy. Selene understood then why she had been drawn here. She was not meant to remain in any single house or castle. She was meant to walk between them, to connect histories others preferred to keep apart. Her beauty made her memorable, but her curiosity gave her purpose. And as she lingered in Durmstrang's library, fingers tracing the spines of tomes banned elsewhere, she smiled softly, aware that her nemif, not her face, might one day be woven into the hidden fabric of wizarding history. The further Selene wandered into Durmstrang's archives, the more the shelves seemed to shift, guiding her deeper than she intended to go. Whispers of enchantments stirred in the air, as though the castle itself were testing her resolve. It was here, far from the warmth of torches, that she discovered a stairwell descending into stone, untouched by centuries of footsteps. The chamber at its end was unlike the library above. It was no collection of books, but a vault of memories. Walls carved with runes so old they hummed faintly beneath her fingertips. In the center rested a pedestal of black granite, and upon it a shard of glass that pulsed as if lit from within. The glow was faint, yet alive, carrying a presence that filled the room like a second heartbeat. She knew at once what it must be. Not a Horcrux, such abominations belonged to a later age, but something older, a fragment of magic designed to hold not soul but will. This was the kind of relic Durmstrang was rumored to protect, the kind Grindelwald might have once studied, the kind the Ministry of Magic would deny ever existed. It was history made tangible, temptation given shape. Selene's beauty belonged to the living world, but in this chamber it felt like defiance against the dark. Her bust rose with each steady breath, her hips shifting with controlled grace as she circled the relic. The curves of her figure reflected faintly in its surface. It was not vanity. It was a reminder that flesh and spirit were stronger than stone and spell. The shard wanted to be claimed, but she let her presence be the answer, an allure so magnetic it unsettled even enchantment. She could have taken it. Power offered itself freely to those bold enough to touch. The glass hummed with possibilities. Dominance in dueling, mastery over minds, a legacy secured in shadow. Many would have reached for it, excusing their desire as curiosity, survival, destiny. Selene only lingered, her lips curving into the faintest smile, the kind that unsettled every man who had ever lost himself in her gaze. She allowed the relic to hunger for her, to ache for her touch, and then she stepped back, refusing it as gently as she would refuse an admirer unworthy of her time. The chamber seemed to exhale, the glow dimming as the artifact settled into silence once more. Selene's decision was quiet, unannounced, but its weight was immense. She had chosen restraint over possession, wisdom over indulgence. She left the relic behind not because she feared it, but because she understood it, an understanding more dangerous to darkness than any curse. When she emerged into the night, Durmstrang loomed the same as before, yet something had shifted. Snow caught the wind and glittered faintly in torchlight. The portraits along the corridor seemed less severe, as though they too had witnessed her choice. Selene walked with the same grace as ever, her beauty unchanged, her presence still magnetic. Yet she carried with her a knowledge that few would ever possess. That true power lay not in what one could claim, but in what one could refuse. And so her story did not become legend, nor did her name find its way into the pages of history. But the wizarding world endured, steadied in part by the quiet strength of witches like Selene Vera, whose choices shaped futures without demanding recognition. The corridors of Durmstrang never seemed so still as when Selene returned from the chamber below. The torchlight bent toward her as if drawn to her warmth, after brushing against the cold weight of the artifact she had refused. Students who crossed her path felt an unfamiliar hush. their conversations thinning into silence. They could not name the reason, only that her presence seemed brighter than before, as if she had brought back fire from a place where none should burn. Her beauty was unchanged, yet deepened. Her bust rose with a rhythm steadier than their own. Her hips swayed with a poise that made footsteps behind her falter. She did not speak, she did not boast, but her allure settled over the hall like a spell cast without wand or word. Even the enchanted suits of armor shifted faintly, as if acknowledging the unseen triumph she carried. She spent the following days in quiet study, but every page she turned seemed different now. Histories of Hogwarts founders, once admired for their vision, revealed to her the compromises they had made between secrecy and ambition. Accounts of Boaksbatten's elegance seemed thinner, polished surfaces concealing what they had chosen not to endure. Durmstrang's darker legacy, once intimidating, now struck her as something else entirely. A survival of knowledge, not a celebration of cruelty. Each tradition had value, but each left blind spots for witches like Selene to see. In time, whispers followed her through the castle. Some said she had found a relic and claimed it. Others believed she had bargained with spirits older than the school itself. None guessed the truth, that she had denied power and, in doing so, gained something rarer. She let the rumors swirl, her soft smile deepening as though she enjoyed watching others invent their own stories about her. Beyond Durmstrang, the world turned as it always had. The Ministry tightened its laws in London, never guessing what lay hidden in the north. Boaksbattens prepared another generation to glitter in French society. Hogwarts cheered in candlelit feasts, Quidditch uniting houses beneath the banners of old rivalries. No one knew that in a forgotten corridor of a foreign school, a choice had been made that steadied the balance between temptation and restraint. Selene carried that secret like an ornament, invisible but radiant. She belonged to no single castle, no single tradition, no single history. Her beauty charmed, her presence unsettled, her wisdom endured. And though her name would never be inked into the official pages of magical record, the wizarding world continued to thrive on the strength of witches like her women, whose power was measured not by what they took, but by what they chose to leave behind. Selene's story lingers like candlelight after flame. She walked into Durmstrang's shadows, touched power that could have rewritten minds, and chose instead to walk away. That decision, invisible to history, reminds us that the wizarding world is not only shaped by those who seize power, but by those who resist it. Her legacy is not an artifact in a museum or a lore in a ministry archive, but a whisper of restraint, proof that true strength often leaves no record at all. If we pause and look back, we can see how her choice echoes what we have learned together in this journey. The beasts of the wizarding world taught us again and again that unchecked power corrodes those who wield it. Dragons, dementors, basilisks, each reveals what happens when awe turns to domination, when fear becomes control. Yet we also saw how the smallest companions, owls swooping through the rafters of Hogwarts, or Crookshanks prowling a common room, remind us that loyalty and intuition sustain a community just as surely as great spells. We walked with thestrals and phoenixes, and discovered that loss and renewal are woven together, that even grief holds lessons if we dare to see. We listened to merpeople in the Black Lake and sphinxes in shadowed mazes, and from them we learned that wisdom is not granted freely, but must be earned with respect. We journeyed to other lands and met thunderbirds, Zeus and Nundis, and realized that creatures are not only beasts but mirrors of culture, each society revealing its values in the way it treats the living world around it. And then, with Selene, we found a final reminder. Not all victories come from action. Some come from the choice to step back, to leave power untouched, to let history pass without claiming it. Her silence carried weight equal to any duel. Her refusal carried meaning greater than possession. In this way, her story ties a thread through all that came before, showing that the lessons of beasts, battles, and myths are not abstractions. They are choices lived out in corridors and chambers, choices that can steady a world. Now, let me turn to you directly. You have walked with me through shadows and firelight, through classrooms, forests, and stories. You have seen what fear, wonder, and restraint can teach a world. But knowledge is always richer when it connects to what we carry in our own hearts. So let me ask you something simple. Out of all the Harry Potter books, which one is your favorite? It might be the very first, where the doors of Hogwarts open for the first time and everything feels new. It might be the middle books, where friendships are tested and the shadows grow darker. Or perhaps it is the last, where the story comes full circle and choices weigh heavier than spells. Whatever you choose, it matters, because the book you hold most closely often reflects the lesson that speaks most clearly to you. So take a moment to think, which one holds your heart? Which one, when you remember it, feels like coming home? For just as Selene's restraint carried meaning beyond the page, your choice carries meaning beyond the story. It tells you what you value, what you admire, what you quietly carry forward into your own life. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all, that the wizarding world is not only about beasts, wands, or battles. It is about the choices we make, the stories we treasure, and the wisdom we decide to leave behind. Selene's choice still lingers in the mind, quiet as falling snow. She left behind power that others would have seized, and in doing so reminded us that the wizarding world is carried as much by restraint as by triumph. Her footsteps fade now into memory, but the questions she raised remain with us. What shapes history? The deeds recorded in books, or the decisions whispered in silence? It is here, between story and history, that we take our next step. The beasts we studied revealed truths about power, culture, and compassion. Selene's tale showed us that those truths live not only in creatures, but in people. Yet if we pause here, we might miss something important. For the wizarding world, as Rowling built it, is not just fiction layered on fiction. It is stitched into centuries of myth, folklore, and even fragments of our own history. When Hogwarts students enter the Forbidden Forest, they are stepping into a literary tradition as old as European storytelling, where every forest is both sanctuary and snare. When wizards speak Parseltang, they are echoing the ancient awe of serpents found in cultures across the globe. When the Marauder's map unfolds, it carries the spirit of medieval maps that blended geography with legend. Again and again, the boundary between wizarding lore and our lore thins until it is almost transparent. And so, as we move forward, let us open our eyes not only to the creatures and spells of canon, but to the little-known connections that tie them to the world outside the page. These are the details that enrich the story, hidden corners where myth and history entwine. Some are easy to miss in a first reading. Others lie waiting in Pottermore essays, interviews, or the fine print of Rowling's own notes. All of them reveal that the wizarding world is not sealed off from ours, it is a mirror shaped by it. Now, let us return to the castle grounds, but with a new perspective. Imagine the edge of the Forbidden Forest, where the trees lean inward and the path fades into shadow. Students speak of unicorns and centaurs within, but few pause to ask why the forest matters at all. Why is it forbidden? Why are forests always the place where the boundary between safety and danger thins? To answer, we must walk into both wizarding lore and human history. For the trees speak twice, once in magic and once in myth. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of the forbidden forest. The castle towers rise behind you, windows glowing with warmth. But before you stretches only darkness. The trees grow thick, their branches twisting together as though to hold their secrets close. The students of Hogwarts are warned again and again, do not enter. Yet, from that very warning, the forest draws its power. For what is forbidden always invites curiosity. Within those trees lives more than shadow. Acromantulas, vast and terrible, weave webs that glisten in the moonlight. Centaurs patrol their clearings with quiet dignity, their arrows ready to remind intruders that humans are not masters here. Unicorns move silently through the undergrowth, their white forms glowing in the gloom. Thestrals graze unseen, visible only to those who have faced death. In the forest, every step carries the possibility of discovery or danger. But the Forbidden Forest is more than a collection of creatures. It is a stage where key moments of the wizarding story unfold. Harry, Ron, and Hermione's first detention drew them into its depths, where they encountered Voldemort's parasitic form feeding on unicorn blood. Years later, the Centaurs carried Dolores Umbridge away into the shadows, justice and humiliation entwined. And in the final battle, the forest became a place of surrender and of courage, where Harry walked to his death beneath its canopy and emerged into rebirth. Again and again, the forest held the turning points of the tale, not because it offered clarity, but because it demanded choice. Why a forest, though? Why this place, rather than a mountain or a cave? Here is where myth outside the wizarding world deepens the story. In European folklore, forests have always been liminal spaces, places where the ordinary world gives way to the extraordinary. In German tales, the Schwarzwald, the Black Forest, was home to wolves and witches alike. In Arthurian legends, knights rode into wild woods, not only to fight beasts, but to find their destiny. To step beneath the trees was to cross into a world where rules loosened and the self was tested. Rowling did not invent this idea, she inherited it. The Forbidden Forest is the latest echo of a tradition that whispers the same truth across centuries. If you wish to know who you are, walk into the woods. Even in real history, forests carried dual meanings. To medieval villagers, the forest was both larder and threat source of food, wood and medicine, but also of outlaws and redditors. It was never entirely safe, and never entirely separate. The word forbidden itself once carried legal weight. In Norman England, royal forests were declared forbidden, not to protect their creatures, but to reserve them for kings. In that sense, the Hogwarts forest is not only a mythic space, but a political one. A land set apart, where rules shift, ownership blurs, and danger waits. So when we step into the Forbidden Forest with Harry, we are stepping into something larger than the story. We are stepping into a tradition where the forest always speaks twice, once in the voice of the beasts within, and again in the voice of myth itself. It says, here is where you are tested. Here is where courage falters or grows. Here is where power reveals its cost. And so we might ask ourselves, what would we see if we walked into those trees? A unicorn, glowing and pure. A centaur, questioning our wisdom. Or perhaps nothing at all, only the sound of branches creaking like voices in a language we have half forgotten. For the forest does not give answers freely. It offers paths and leaves the choice to us. Picture the chamber beneath Hogwarts. Stone serpents coil along the walls, their mouths open as though waiting for a voice that can wake them. When Harry stands before the basilisk, it is not his wand that grants him passage, but his tongue. The words of Parseltang slip into the air, harsh and strange, and stone obeys sound. Here, language itself becomes magic. Parseltang is feared in the wizarding world. To speak it marks a witch or wizard as dangerous, even untrustworthy. Salazar Slytherin spoke it, as did Voldemort, and the association lingers. Yet Harry, who never sought the gift, reminds us that a language cannot be evil by itself. It is only sound, shaped by intention. The basilisk does not ask who commands it. It obeys the tongue. Fear of Parseltang, then, reveals less about serpents and more about how wizards treat difference. But Parseltang is not the only beast language in canon. Dumbledore was said to speak Mermish, Gobbledygook, and even Troll. A polyglot whose talents suggest that communication with magical beings requires more than spells. It requires respect. Hagrid tried his hand at speaking with giants, though his half-brother Grop never fully understood. Each attempt at language is also an attempt at trust. Now, step outside the books for a moment. Serpents have always carried mystery in Muggle culture. In the Bible, a serpent whispers temptation. In Hindu mythology, the Naga is both divine and dangerous. In Aztec lore, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, is a god of wind and wisdom. Across time, snakes have been voices of both knowledge and fear. Rowling did not invent this tension. She gave it form in Parseltang, a language that hisses with history as much as with sound. Even the word gobbledygook, used for the goblin tongue, plays with Muggle language. It is a term in English meaning jargon that is hard to understand. The choice is sly. To wizards, goblin speech is strange. To goblins, it is identity. Again, we see that language reflects power. Who names a tongue gibberish, and who claims it as their own? In this way, beast languages in the wizarding world echo real-world truths. Human cultures have long treated foreign tongues with suspicion, labeling them as rough, harsh, or incomprehensible. Wizards do the same with Parseltang, forgetting that meaning lies not in the sound, but in the speaker. Harry's ability to speak with snakes could have marked him as a pariah. Instead, it became part of his survival, even his triumph. So, reflect on this. What language would you choose to learn, if you could? The deep, commanding hiss of Parseltang, the flowing song of Mermish beneath the lake. Or perhaps the gruff syllables of Gobbledygook, spoken across Gringotts counters with quiet defiance. Each choice would carry not just knowledge, but a stance. To learn a language is to declare what voices you are willing to hear. In the end, the languages of beasts remind us that words themselves are magical. They open doors, shape trust, and reveal prejudice. Whether in our world or in the wizarding world, to understand another tongue is not simply to speak. It is to listen and to see the world through another's eyes. Unfold a piece of parchment. At first glance, it looks blank, unimpressive. The kind of scrap a student might crumple at the bottom of a satchel. But then, a whispered phrase, "I solemnly swear that I am up to no good." And the map awakens. Ink spills across the page like rivers of thought, lines forming corridors, staircases, hidden passages. Names move across the surface. Tiny footprints marking the lives of a castle in motion. The Marauder's map is not a drawing of Hogwarts. It is Hogwarts itself, alive in ink. The map, crafted by James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew, was more than a prankster's tool. It was a work of genius, blending cartography, enchantment, and intimacy. It did not just show places, it showed people. Every secret door, every passage, every inhabitant revealed. To hold the map was to hold the pulse of the school. Yet pause for a moment and notice how unusual this is. Most magical objects in the wizarding world amplify power. a wand, a broom, a potion. The Marauder's map does something different. It amplifies knowledge. It teaches us that knowing where people are, and how space is shaped, can be as powerful as any spell. Now, let us step outside the wizarding world. In medieval Europe, maps were never only about geography. A mappa mundi, a map of the world, often included rivers and mountains. Yes, but also monsters at the edges of the earth, biblical events, and moral lessons. The Hereford Mappa Mundi, still preserved today, shows not only towns, but the Garden of Eden, the Tower of Babel, and creatures from legend. Maps were guides to both land and imagination. The Marauder's map continues this tradition. It is not just about hallways and staircases. It is a living Mappa Mundi of Hogwarts, mixing place with presence, fact with movement. Where Muggles once drew dragons on the margins of their charts, the Marauders drew names walking through corridors. Both maps ask us to see that knowledge is never only about where, it is also about who and why. Even the phrases tied to the map, "I solemnly swear that I am up to no good," and "mischief managed," echo the playful tone of map-making across history. Explorers scribbled notes in the margins of their charts, half warning, half joke. Sailors wrote, "Here be dragons." To mark the unknown, the Marauders, in their mischief, continued this tradition, turning mapping into a living prank, yet also into survival. For Harry, the map was more than a toy. It was the tool that revealed Peter Pettigrew, long thought dead, hiding in plain sight. So, what does this teach us? That maps, magical or not, shape how we see the world. They do not only record space, they interpret it, choosing what to reveal and what to hide. The Marauder's map reveals everything within Hogwarts, but nothing beyond. A medieval Mappa Mundi shows Jerusalem at its center, but ignores entire continents. Every map has a perspective. Every map carries bias. So let me ask you directly. If you had the Marauder's map, what would you look for first? Would you trace your friend's footsteps in the corridors, curious about their secrets? Would you guard against enemies, tracking their movements? Or would you close it quickly, uneasy with how much it reveals? For in the end, the map asks not only how we see others, but how we wish to be seen. Far in the Scottish Highlands, where mist clings to the water and the air smells of peat and rain, there lies a lake that both wizards and Muggles know well. To Muggles, it is Loch Ness, home to stories of a great serpent that surfaces in photographs and vanishes just as quickly. To wizards, it is something more certain, something more dangerous. The largest kelpie in the world. A kelpie is a shapeshifter, a water demon that often takes the form of a horse. It lures the unwary to climb onto its back, then plunges into the water to drown them. Most kelpies can be subdued with a bridle, but the Loch Ness kelpie is different. Immense in size, playful in its defiance, it has never been fully contained. Ministry officials have tried spells, barriers, and concealment charms. But the creature delights in breaking free. Each time, the Muggles catch a glimpse. A shadow in a photograph, a ripple across the water, a story that refuses to die. This is not just an amusing footnote in wizarding lore. It is a challenge to the very statute of secrecy. Written in 1692, the statute was meant to protect both Muggles and magical beings by dividing their worlds. Yet, the Loch Ness kelpie ignores such boundaries. It does not agree to remain hidden. Wizards can banish dragons to remote valleys, ward merfolk beneath the waves, and build walls of enchantment around trolls. But what do they do when a creature insists on being seen? Here is where the Muggle tradition blends with the wizarding one. Sightings of the Loch Ness monster exploded in the 1930s. Fueled by the spread of photography and mass media, Grainy images, blurred but suggestive, captured imaginations around the world. To wizards, these were not accidents of chance, but the Kelpie at play, mocking the ministry by turning secrecy into spectacle. Muggles explained it as myth, but myth itself has power. It keeps the story alive. Rowling folded this seamlessly into canon, showing how wizarding secrecy does not erase creatures from history, only transforms them into legend. Nessie is not an invention. She is an echo of truth, distorted by distance, preserved by story. The Loch Ness Kelpie forces us to confront a larger question. What happens when magical creatures refuse silence? When thestrals graze at the edge of a forest, unseen unless grief has opened your eyes, secrecy holds. When a Kelpie bursts from a loch with the whole world watching, secrecy falters. Perhaps that is why myths endure in both worlds. They are the points where the veil thins, where the forbidden and the familiar touch. So reflect on this with me. If you stood at the edge of Loch Ness and saw the water rise, the shape of something vast cutting the surface, would you think of monsters or miracles? Would you run in fear, or would you stay and watch, knowing you were standing at the edge of two worlds? For in the end, beasts like the Kelpie remind us that magic is never fully hidden. It breathes beneath the surface, rising now and then, daring us to see. Long before Harry walked through the doors of Hogwarts, another name lingered in wizarding history: Nicholas Flamel. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, he is introduced as a centuries-old alchemist, friend of Dumbledore, and the creator of the stone that grants immortality. Readers often think of him as a purely fictional invention, but here the story does something unusual. Nicholas Flamel was real. In 14th century Paris, the historical Flamel was a bookseller and scribe. After his death, legends grew that he had uncovered the secrets of the Philosopher's Stone, the mythical substance that could transmute base metals into gold and grant eternal life. These tales spread through Europe, entwining fact and fantasy until Flamel's name became synonymous with alchemy itself. Rowling drew directly on this lore, pulling a figure from real history into wizarding canon. But Flamel's story is only the beginning. The creatures tied to alchemy carry symbols just as enduring. Take the Phoenix. In the wizarding world, Fawkes bursts into flame and is reborn, his tears capable of healing even basilisk venom. In alchemical tradition, the Phoenix has long represented resurrection, renewal, and the eternal cycle of life and death. It is the perfect emblem of the Philosopher's Stone, a reminder that transformation is not only of metal but of the soul. Unicorns, too, hold their place in both worlds. In the books, their blood grants cursed life, while their hair can form the core of wands. In Muggle lore, the unicorn has been a symbol of purity since the Middle Ages. Often depicted resting in the lap of a maiden, its horn capable of neutralizing poison. Both traditions agree. Unicorns embody innocence and the price of its loss. Even the Ouroboros, the serpent, devouring its own tail, lurks behind wizarding symbolism. It appears in alchemical manuscripts as the endless cycle of death and rebirth, unity and eternity. Though not directly named in the Potter series, the imagery resonates with the basilisk. A serpent whose gaze brings death, but who, slain by the sword of Gryffindor, allows Harry to live anew. Serpents in wizarding lore are never just creatures. They are emblems of cycles, of danger entwined with knowledge. The Philosopher's Stone itself was said to bring perfection, gold, health, eternal life. Wizards in canon treated it with awe, but also with caution. Dumbledore and Flamel agreed to destroy it after Voldemort's attempt to seize it, teaching that true wisdom is not in the hoarding of power, but in its release. This echoes a lesson from alchemical writings. which often spoke less about wealth and more about spiritual transformation. To create the stone was to refine the self. So when we read about Flamel in the first book, we are not simply encountering a magical MacGuffin. We are brushing against centuries of real human imagination, where scholars, mystics, and dreamers sought the secret of eternity. Rowling wove this into the wizarding world to remind us that magic and myth have always walked side by side. Let me ask you now, if you were given the Philosopher's Stone, would you use it for wealth, for life, or for nothing at all? Flamel chose to let it go. In that choice lies the same restraint we saw in Selene Vera, and the same wisdom we saw in beasts like unicorns and phoenixes. Perhaps the true stone is not an object, but the courage to decide what is enough. We have walked through many halls together. First came the beasts themselves, shadows and wonders of the wizarding world. From dementors to dragons, from owls to phoenixes, we learned that creatures are never only background. They are teachers. They remind us that fear reveals truth, that companionship builds trust, and that grief can become sight if we allow it. Each creature was a mirror, showing wizards what they were, and what they might yet become. Then we stepped into story. Selene Vera's journey at Durmstrang gave those lessons flesh and breath. She could have claimed a relic of terrible power. Instead, she turned away. Her decision was quiet, unrecorded, almost invisible. Yet that choice carried weight, teaching that sometimes the greatest magic is not in what you take, but in what you refuse. In her restraint, we saw the echo of every lesson the beasts had offered. That power without wisdom corrodes, but restraint can preserve a world. From there, we pulled back the curtain to glimpse the hidden threads, details that bound wizarding lore to our own history. The Forbidden Forest spoke with the same voice as ancient European woods, places of danger and transformation. Parseltang and Mermish reminded us that language is both bridge and barrier, feared when misunderstood. The Marauder's map echoed medieval charts that mixed fact with imagination, proving that maps are never only about land, they are about perspective. The Loch Ness Kelpie showed us how myths thrive when creatures refuse to stay hidden. And Nicholas Flamel tied the series to centuries of alchemy, where phoenixes and unicorns carried meanings long before Hogwarts was built. Taken together, these journeys suggest something larger. The wizarding world is not just castles, wands, and spells. It is a commentary on how we treat the strange, the powerful, and the hidden. Do we control them, or do we respect them? Do we chase them for gain, or honor them for wisdom? Every beast, every relic, every story quietly asks us the same thing. What kind of person are you becoming? And so, as you sit with these stories, let me ask you a question. Not about lore, not about dates or spells, but about connection. Who is your favorite character in the Harry Potter world? Is it a hero like Harry or Hermione, who carried burdens with courage? A teacher like McGonagall, who balanced discipline with care? A flawed figure like Snape, whose story is tangled with love and betrayal? Or perhaps someone quieter, Luna, Lovegood, Hagrid, Neville, characters who remind us that strength often hides in gentleness, loyalty, or persistence? Your answer matters. It reveals what lessons resonate with you most. For just as the wizarding world teaches through creatures, through maps, through myths, it also teaches through the characters we hold close. And the one you choose often says as much about you as it does about them. We've walked through shadows and wonders, learning from the creatures of the wizarding world, following Selene through choices few would have the strength to make, and uncovering the hidden threads that tie magic to myth and myth to us. But the story doesn't end here. It lives on in you. I'd love to know, who is your favorite character, And why? Is it someone heroic, someone flawed, or someone gentle and overlooked? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I treasure reading them. Each response feels like another lantern glowing across the world. I once saw someone write that they were listening from Australia, and it made me smile. These stories travel far, and those connections remind me why I create them. And if tonight's story helped you rest, inspired your imagination, or gave you even a moment of calm, then I ask for something small in return. Every like you give, every comment you leave, every subscription you choose, it truly matters. It's not just a number on a screen. Each one helps me make these stories better. Each one helps me add richer visuals, softer sounds, deeper journeys for you to wander through. My dream is to build something extraordinary here. A channel filled with the best sleep stories and the most beautiful worlds to close your eyes to. A place you can come back to again and again when you need peace, wonder, or simply the comfort of a voice guiding you into rest. With your support, even with one simple click, that dream moves closer to becoming real, and I want you to be part of shaping it. Tell me in the comments what you'd like to hear next. Is there a story you've always wished existed? A myth, a piece of lore, a place, or even a character you want explored? Your ideas can guide these stories. Together, we can weave something unique, something transformative, something that belongs to all of us. So if you'd like to keep walking these paths with me, like, subscribe, share these stories with someone who might need them. Every step helps build this world, and every voice helps guide where we go next. For now, let the night hold you. Breathe slowly with the music. Rest in the knowledge that there will always be another story waiting here whenever you're ready.